So that the strength of that song in my life is of this nature. It was our last Sunday before our release on Monday that as we're sitting in the jail cell in Port-au-Prince, Haiti, just outside of the airport, where every time we go to Haiti, we get to drive by that glorious place. But in the distance, as we're sitting in that jail cell, I can hear in the distance familiar tunes. Every Sunday we would hear the singing of the church. Somewhere they were singing. And in Haiti, churches don't have walls like this. They're open walls because you need a breeze. And so you don't put up a wall like this unless you have air conditioning. And you only have air conditioning if you have electricity all of the time. And that's not very often either. So in the distance we would hear every Sunday we were there, we would hear the church singing. And you could hear them singing familiar tunes in their own native languages. And how sweet it would be. We would gather together, the men in the jail cell, along with the other inmates that were there, the Haitians and the one Dominican Republic man that was in there, and the women who are on the other side of a wall. We would sing together along with them. The Haitians in the jail would sing in Creole. We would sing in English. The church singing in Creole outside. And it was that last Sunday we were there. Very distinctly, this song, the tunes come when you don't have a hymn book. Of course, Renee will tell you this: when she sits next to me and I'm singing without a hymn book, I really don't know the words of any song. I make them up as I go along. I'm singing verse 2 with verse 1, and I'm singing the chorus of another song that's not even related to this one. But in this particular occasion, every succinct word came crystal clear to my mind. Mostly because, for some reason, the Haitian church that we could hear that day was singing in English. Oh, they weren't singing to me. They didn't know we were in jail. They weren't singing to Steve. They weren't singing to Silas. They were singing to God. And it was though God gave us the privilege to hear a message. Oh, soul, are you weary and troubled? So right now I've even lost the words. Something about darkness and weariness. And in a charge to turn your eyes upon Jesus and to look fully in His face. Well, we knew we would go home by the grace of God unless some other snafu would happen. We had been told this for nearly a week. Tomorrow you go home, which meant not really. But this one was certain. It would be the next day that we would see Alex walk through the door late in the day. We're beginning to think, apparently another day. Late in the day, Alex comes walking through the door as he did every day, at different times of the day. And Alex says, "Today is the day of your freedom." And behind him were lawyers and for the first time, U.S. Embassy people that were pleased to see us. Yes. To escort us to the airport and to send us home. And while all of that commotion is going on, I can't get my eyes off of Alex. And to be certain I've heard what he said, only to see the policemen ushering Alex as quickly as they can away from us, as though they didn't want him to be the one to break the news. But he was the one who broke the news. Let me try my best to give you a 30,000-foot view of those God-ordained days. Now, some of you are hearing this story and you know nothing about this scenario. You know nothing of this situation. Some of you have heard pieces of it. Some of you are thinking, there's something about this perhaps that I remember. It's been nearly 9 years ago. It was January of 2010 10 that Steve and myself and Gail, some of you who have been here for a long time will remember Gail. We were actually in the plans of returning, for me, a return trip to Saudi Arabia with our work with the Saudi Advocacy Network to begin a prayer tour across the nation, asking that God would bring a gospel planting movement upon that fallow soil of Saudi Arabia. I still pray that. I still pray for that to happen. But in the providential hand of God, it wasn't working out. Our passports were being delayed and denied, our visa applications. So it was looking as though it wasn't really going to happen. Steve had asked off time from work. Gail had secured time to be away as well. And you, the church, had given me permission to be away as well. At that time, I was driving school buses, and I had already secured time away during those days to go and be in this prayer walking, gospel engaging walk across, we'll say, so all of a sudden it sounds like we're going to walk all the way across Saudi Arabia. You get what I mean, don't you? I mean, buses and airplanes and cars. But it just wasn't working out. And then the news came of the reminder to the world about the nation of Haiti and that devastating earthquake that reminded at least me. I remember as a boy growing up in the 70s and 80s, we'd hear about Haiti. We were constantly reminded and told about the plight of the Haitian under the dictatorship of Baby Doc. Go back and reread your world history and find of the cruelty of Baby Doc and the hardship and the complications that was given to the nation of Haiti. And Haitians were fleeing on homemade boats to float past Cuba, because there's nothing better in Cuba waiting for them, but through treacherous waters to eventually reach American soil because of the hope that they might have peace and security in American soil. So I remember as a boy seeing this plight and hearing of this plight and knowing that it was a real serious matter. But, you know, as years go by, sometimes we quickly forget things. And it's as though it was as though all of the issues of Haiti were completely disappeared. And apparently they're all eating and they're well again and the country is surviving. But we were reminded quickly, the first news of hearing of the massive destruction of this earthquake, particularly in the city of Port-au-Prince. A sister church of ours in Boise, or in Meridian, Central Valley Baptist Church, sent out a request to churches in the area. Do you have any men who are able to travel with some women from our church who are going? Because they had already been engaged in some children's care, orphan care, housing of children in the early stages of that in the Dominican Republic, to primarily be a rescue place of Haitian children who are in slavery, to get them, rescue them, and return them to Haiti, into homes of their home country. They sent out requests to churches, do you have men who can go? Because they have a place that needs some work, and they can begin to prepare for the receiving of children that they're going to begin moving out of Port-au-Prince across the border and into the Dominican Republic, specifically up into the northern portion of that island, Espanol. And so I contacted Steve, and I want you to know this about this brother. I think the brother is prepared to say yes to anything that God would clearly show him of his willingness to go. And he will also say no when he knows that the Spirit of God has not moved him to do so. But sometimes you ask somebody to do something, you can tell they're trying to figure out a way, how do I tell them no? And I think Steve's trying to say, how can I go ahead and tell him to quit talking and let me say yes? So Steve had agreed to come. I communicated with my sons and invited them to come. They were both at that time. Now, I'll stop and tell a side story. I do have to correct part of my illustration this morning of the walking across the river, the North Fork of the Boise River. No, it was the Big Smoky River. Yeah, it was actually Silas that fell on the upstream side of that log and got temporarily pinned. It probably wasn't nearly as dangerous as I thought it was. But and he was not the first one to cross. Half of the group was already across safely. They got across without any problem until my youngest son, Silas. Yeah. So I needed to go ahead and correct that story. My family expects me now to still pay them when I use them for illustrations. No. When I tell the story wrong, they have to pay me. So that's why I tell the stories wrong. So I may have this part of the story wrong. I tell you that to tell you this. Silas, were you living in Omaha at that time? Good. I should have just went with it. Silas had moved to Omaha to live with his older brother because he was experiencing some health issues while he was still in the Air Force. And we were grateful for that willingness of him to go. So anyway, I communicated to my boys, invited them to come. Obviously, David couldn't because he was still in active duty with the Air Force. But Silas immediately says yes. We begin making arrangements to get him here, to fly him there so we can all meet up. And then I also sent word out to some of my extended family, people who I know who respond to things, invitations like this, and who I know have skills in construction, who have skills in being able to help in matters like this. So my cousin, Jim Allen, and Renee's brother, Drew, within hours of me sending out a request, reply, say, what do I need to do? When are we leaving? How much money do I need? Blah, 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 blah. On and on and on the questions go. But the questions were not, how can I find a way to politely tell you, no, I can't go? They were, I got to get as much information right now because we immediately got to go. I cannot stay at home. I got to go. So within 1 day, 5 men respond with an immediate, yes, I can go. Let me finish up a few things. Let me know when we need to leave. 5 women from Central Valley Baptist Church, 5 men from Eastside Baptist Church, 2 of those being related to us through family members. Board airplanes in Meridian, Texas, Kansas, Omaha. I don't remember, Silas, how did you even get here? Did you drive? Hopefully it wasn't Medicine, Florida, because I'm hoping you didn't drive that car you bought while you were in Omaha. So flying from where's Omaha? Nebraska, from Kansas, from Texas, from Idaho, all merging in Florida to prepare to then fly over into the Dominican Republic because the airport, planes were unable to land in Port-au-Prince at that time. So we would have to land in the Dominican Republic, gather up as many supplies as we could, make our way to the place where they were going to begin making preparations to receive the children up in the north part of the country. So we made the long bus drive up to there. We're looking at this abandoned hotel that the church in Meridian was in the process of exploring the purchase of this facility to do exactly what we were there then to do. So we're looking around. Steve is making observations. Jim is making observations, considerations, shopping list of things we need to go and get from the lumber stores and put out the request. How are we going to get this? A church out of Texas is making plans to arrive within about 4 or 5 days with an army of people to begin the construction. And others from our own church. You remember John Requa? Helen, why did you ever let that man leave and come? You couldn't stop him, could you? There was no stopping him from going. Others from our church, from our Matt and Laura Kreider, eventually arrive in the Dominican Republic. Throughout the scenario, these 5 brave women from Meridian were on their way to Haiti with or without the men of our church. And we had a discussion about the matter, and I could not in good conscience feel like this was a good idea to let those women go into the unknown of what everyone is reporting to us is as near a war zone as you can imagine, the effect of this earthquake. And so Rather than us stay at the hotel, we agreed together that if my wife were in this scenario, I would want some man to say, "You're not going by yourself, we're going with you." I don't regret that decision. One moment. We make our way into Haiti. We begin, they're doing all of the arrangements. They have connections with lots of people that they've been working with and communicating with. We're essentially around to make sure nobody comes and takes over the bus we're in, or protecting the women, thinking about how is this going to work out. There's a lot of confusion in the city, and bridges are impassable. You have to drive through the rivers. You have to drive around debris. It was a mess. So all of the connections, we first arrived at a home that the church in Meridian had been working with initially, and when we arrived there was no one there. No one there to give us any more information about where the children were, where they had been moved, and how we could go to help them. They were working this out. The next place we go that they'd been working with, the orphanage director, the children were gone. The orphanage director was still there. But he has found a way to make money off of the plight of his countrymen. And he's using the food and the money that people are giving him to sell the food off at higher prices, and to gather as much money as possible from other places. And so there's no children there for us to work with. So we realize at that point then, through other leads and other directions, that there is a community in the central part, not far from the airport, that had several children that needed to be moved into a safe and secure place. We make way there. We begin to talk with the officials. We talk with the leaders of this particular community, where they had gathered the families out of their homes into these tent communities. Alex and Joanne, what I'm describing to you, they could tell you how these places became immediately villages and communities inside the city, because people are moving out of their homes because they're unsafe to live in. And they're living in tents in the city, where once they were living, at least at some levels, in kindness of homes. But as we arrive there is as much confusion there as there is about everything else. And as we begin to discuss, there are children there that the community, the village, know that these children do not have parents. No one has identified them. No one has come to claim them. They're just here. They're here in this roped off area, and they need a place where they're going to get food. And so our team decides that we will make this attempt. We have worked with this what you would call a village leadership, the pastor of the church. So we follow the instructions that they give us. I will say at this point, this is a kindness of God that a police officer crosses our path at this moment. And we engage in conversation with him. He hears the story of what we're doing, and he tells us, this is a good thing that you're here to do, but if you do this right now, you may be in trouble. So he tells us that we need to make other arrangements. And so everything we have gone attempting to do, we want to do as one who would respect the local authority. We're not there as the experts from the outside. We've not come to save the day. We've come to work alongside of whatever God would bring our way. So we actually returned the children back into the little village, to the pastor and to their care. We explained to them, we don't have authority to take these children. We need to go get more paperwork. We need to finish up some other details. Well, it was necessary for us then to make a trip all the way back over into the Dominican Republic, more or less to just kind of regather, rethink the process. Do we need to abandon the work? Is it just not going to work out? So through much prayer, through much conversations, we do discover a pastor in Port-au-Prince that has a children's home in 2 locations, and a 3rd location up in the mountain area that is not an official home for children, but a place where his church does work with the children that are there. So we do return 2 days later back into the city of Port-au-Prince. So we've been away from home at this point about 6 days, with 5 days, 6 days. And so we arrive at the home where We've been instructed that the pastor will meet us. He'll transfer the registry of the children. We arrive there. There is damage done to the home. While we're there, they're bringing the children out. We're checking off the registry for the names that they've given us in advance with the names of the children, the birth dates, all of the statistical data that we've been told we need to have. And while we're out there, a young man by the name that I later learned to be Alex Viard walked up to me and says, speaking in pretty good English, he introduces himself and asks what we're doing. I explained to him what we're here doing. We're working with this home that's here with this pastor. And of course, I don't know his name, and I don't even know where we're at in the city. But I have this conversation with Alex. He's got a friend with him by the name of Junior and another lady by the name of Florence, who become strategically God-ordained individuals in our lives in the days to come that we are totally unaware of. Alex tells me of some children that his family have gathered in their neighborhood just up the road from where this orphanage was. And he asked if we would be able to help them with these children. So I walked with Alex around the corner, about 5 or 6 blocks from this place. And sure enough, there's about 4 or 5 children that are up here. These are children that parents have not been found or located since the earthquake. We're now probably close to about 9 to 10 days from the earthquake. And so some days have gone by that these children's parents have not come looking for them, or they're looking for them in the wrong places. And I explained to Alex that under the new understanding that we have of what we're doing, we can only work with organized homes. And we're only allowed to work off of this transfer of registration from this home into our care, and that they're only going to temporary care, and then they will come back whenever this home is rebuilt, and at such a time. And this was happening all over the city by all kinds of organizations. And so we received from this location and a second location, and then a couple from the mountain location, 38 children. So there's 10 Americans who speak no Creole, with 38 children who only speak Creole. It was sweet. We did have a translator with us, so we could learn the emergency needs that were necessary. So anyway, we go searching for further documentations that we know, legal documentations that we're going to need to have from Child Protective Services. We're not interested in doing anything that doesn't have permission for us to be doing this. We make attempts. The day grows late. We make the decision that it's too late to go to the border. So we go to a Christian school that we have been in and out of a couple of times prior to this, seeking refuge. We have 38 children and 10 Americans. We haven't eaten at this point. We hadn't eaten in close to 20 hours. And we have food and water for the children, a peanut butter, what they call a plumpy nut. It's a highly nutritious peanut butter blend that we have sufficient order for the children, and we're feeding them this, and bottles of water that we have as well. So we go to this Christian school that has connection to our sister church in Meridian, and we're refused privilege to come into their school just to bed the children down on the ground. And so we have to make a decision that we got to sleep somewhere. So we just pulled around to the other street that came alongside of the Christian school and slept on the street with the children. We felt like that was probably the safest place to do that. And I'll get down into the weedy parts here for just a moment. If I could have found that rooster that night and those dogs, I don't know what I would have done. It's a good thing I didn't go looking for them. One of the most miserable nights I've ever experienced. We're on a public street in a city we cannot speak the language in. Uncertain what's next. We're responsible for 38 children. Oh God, come and give us rest. Well, the next day comes, we make way back to Child Protective Services, we gather some documents that we're told we need to have. We're told you need to go to another office. This is the city office. You need to go to the state office. We go to the state office. So this is driving with 38 children in small buses. 2 very small buses that hold about 12 people each. Just work on your math for just a minute here, okay? Doing everything according to what we're being instructed by the authorities, and make our way then back to the city Child Protective Services over by the airport, which will eventually be our home for the next 19 days. We did not know that at that moment, but we arrived back there to gather more documentation or more permission. They said that they're waiting on information from the Dominican Republic. They don't have that yet. They should receive it at some time, and that they gave us the green light to go ahead and go to the border, even though we didn't have that document from the Dominican Republic, the guarantee that it would be waiting for you when you got to the border. So we did what the authorities instructed us to do. We drove to the border, and we're going through the whole passport process, exchanging, lots of inquiring, lots of people moving out of Haiti into the Dominican Republic. So there's a lot of waiting, a lot of downtime. Eventually, the leader, Laura Silsby, out of Central Valley Baptist Church, is ushered into the chief police officer of the border to come in and to explain the case. She brings the documentation. She tells the story of where we've been, names of officers we've spoken to, instructions of where the home was, and where we're going, address and location, all the things that they're requesting. The office is waiting. They ask a question. They all leave, and 15 minutes later they may come back in. They ask a simple little question. They'll leave, and they'll come back, and then they'll leave for a long time, and then they'll come back and ask an unnecessary question, and then leave for a long time and come back. And we learn later that really they're delaying for no other reason than for us to reach for our wallets and slip some money across the table, and we'll be on our way. We learn that only from, this is what, and I don't hold a bad idea about this with other missionary agencies that do this. There are many agencies that have that in their minds this is not an ethical problem. This is the way we live. If we don't do this, we sit in offices like you did. And we sit for a very long time. We made the decision ahead of time that we would only pay documented fees. Bribes are undocumented. Otherwise, they would not be called bribes. So we learned that that's the system. Nearly every other organization, Christian organization, is crossing the border with less documentation than we had. Because they were willing to slide money across the table, under the table, around the table, drop it on the ground, however they would exchange it. So delay. Finally, night is coming upon us. We're being told that you don't have sufficient documentation. We're arguing the case. This is what they've told us. They make phone calls. At this time, phone lines have been back up. Prior to that, they were down still, but they were able to make phone calls to the offices. Nobody was collaborating our story, and they said, "Listen, you're just going to have to go back to the office from which you came. They'll have the documentation for you in the morning." So again, we're considering, we have 38 children. We're in a country where we don't have any money. We don't have the language. So where are we going to take these children now? We certainly don't want to take them back to the city, because the place where we wanted to stay, we're not letting us in for whatever reason. And I don't hold that against them. They have a good reason for it, I'm sure. But here's the situation, is now we're being told that you can stay here overnight at the border. So we get all the children off the bus. We bed them down on concrete slabs that are there at the border. And the border guards come. And at this point, we do have some military, John, what are they called? MREs? MRIs? MREs. So, things like macaroni and cheese and steak, and I don't know if steak, but we're going to eat for the first time now for a couple of days. And the border guards have surrounded us. We're sharing a meal with them. They're speaking broken English, but we're able to communicate quite a bit with them. And they're expressing gratitude. We learned from one man by the name of Snyder. He grew up in an orphanage, a Baptist orphanage in Port-au-Prince. And he's telling us, thank you for what you're doing. The care that they gave me an opportunity. It gave me a direction in my life, and I'm grateful for what you're doing. We talked a bit. Come to find out, he did not know Jesus Christ as his personal Lord and Savior. Through the translation, now working to try to speak to his heart, we speak the gospel unto him, and by the grace of God, Snyder repents of his sins that night and turns to God. We finish our meals rejoicing that God would delay us for the sake of the gospel, expecting the next morning we would make one more drive back into the city, gather the documents, and then finally meet up with our church family who've now arrived in the Dominican Republic. We get back to Child Protective Services, the police office that is located on just outside the property. It backs up against the runway of the airport. And as we pull in there, we're expecting this will be just a few moments of some details and exchanging of documentations, again, explaining the scenarios and the situation. Eventually, we're all ushered off of the bus and invited to come into the lobby area that is about the size of my office. So again, work on your mathematics here for a second. 38 children, 10 Americans, and we're not little Americans. So here we are in tight, confined quarters, and no one's removed children from us, so we have no reason to believe there's any issues. We're caring for the children. We're getting water for the children. We're still feeding them this plumpy nut peanut butter all throughout the day. The children are laughing and playing. They're sitting in our laps. They're hugging our necks. They're in our arms. And we have no idea what's going on behind closed doors. Eventually, Laura is invited in to, again, sit down with the chief of police at this time of the city of Port-au-Prince. And she explains the situation, the scenario. The police chief is sympathetic for the cause. He's in agreement that we have done all that's been requested of us to do. But he, with regret, cannot let us leave. Because we're now living in a country of a judicial system that is completely the opposite of what we love and cherish. Where in our judicial system, you're innocent until you prove you're guilty. In a Napoleonic judicial system, you're guilty until you prove your innocence. Someone has pressed a charge against us of illegal activity. Now, we don't know at this moment who this is. But the chief of police is sympathetic to our cause. He's sympathetic to the situation. He's apologetic for the scenario. But he's a man of the law. And so he cannot let us leave. So we have to wait. The initial parts of the judicial system is quite chaotic and quite fast. It rolls like a whirlwind, and then it settles down to where there's no breeze for hours, just metaphorically speaking. So we have to wait for an initial judge to come in, hear the case, hear the chief of police, hear Laura's case, and hear the one who's pressed the charges against us. And then to make an initial assessment, then what do we do? Because you're guilty of this, and has there been enough evidence immediately to prove that you're innocent? So again, part of this judicial system, these are things I've learned from this side of life. We didn't necessarily have full knowledge of this at the time. That really it's whoever has the most money wins the case. Not in all cases, but certainly in a case such as this. 10 Americans, these guys have money. And it became clear through the judicial process that money was a big component of the matter. And so the case is pleaded by the chief of police on our case that yes, we have done everything that we've said that we've done. We have documentation that we've been given, and yet the one who's pressing charges against us, we learn later on, is a powerhouse, is a monstrous powerhouse standing against us. We don't know this at the time. So a couple more hours go by. The world media has now showed up outside the jail. And the world media is setting up tents, and the world media is setting up cameras. They're setting up tables. They're setting up to stay. We're being told that the president of the country is about to make an announcement. Now, little did I know how few people would have a television to hear a message from the president. But he is indeed coming to make an announcement, but his announcement is not to give an update about the condition of the earthquake. The announcement is we have arrested 10 Americans for trying to traffic children, or trying to transport children across the border without documentation. So the announcement is made of this, and we have had a little bit of phone communication with our church family in the Dominican Republic. And I'll try to explain this. I'm probably nowhere near 30,000 feet. I'm probably more like 100 feet or 10 feet in the observation of this. But I get a phone call on this old flip phone of mine that I have with me from Matt Kreider. And Matt Kreider says, "Are you guys okay?" So in the Dominican Republic, they know what we don't know, that we've been arrested. We don't know we've been arrested. We're still caring for the children. We're still holding children in our laps. We're feeding them. We're trying to keep them from crying. And Matt's asking, "Are things okay?" And we explain, we have a delay here, but it shouldn't be long, and we'll be along the way, because that's what we're being told. Eventually, we are ushered, all 10 of us, into the office of the chief of police. And there we're interrogated the same way. We're all asked the same questions. They're doing their job. Listen, I would expect any nation and any police department to do what they were doing to us. And they're asking us these questions, and there are people in the room, we don't know who they are. One of them being the primary accuser against us. We'll learn in a moment what the issue is and who they represent. But still at this point, we don't know all that's going on. But it's clear that we're probably delayed enough today that we're not going to be able to go to the Dominican Republic tonight. We'll go tomorrow. A couple more hours go by. It's now late in the afternoon. The sun is still shining, but it's late in the afternoon. And for the second time now, the media has made their way into the outside office. And every time they come in, there's wailing from the children. There's no way for me to describe it outside of just a moaning wailing of the children. By this time, I've had the opportunity to make friends with a Haitian policeman who speaks English. And so I asked him, why every time when the media comes in, does this tone of moaning and wailing just overcome the children? And they're as they're sitting on our laps and they're laying their heads on our shoulders, what are they being told? What's going on? And so this policeman told me, he said, the media is telling these children that the police have stopped us from taking them to the Dominican Republic to sell their body parts into the black market of organ, which is a real thing, by the way. So that's why they're moaning. That's why they start crying for their moms. They start crying for their dads. But nobody's worried about us, though, because no one's taking the children from us while they're telling this. They just want some good footage of the children crying, because they want to send footage back to you of how the children were saved and rescued from these Americans who were going to sell their body parts on the black market. So how peculiar it is that these children remain in our arms and remain in our laps and keep holding our hands. It's an unexplainable kind of a scenario. Twice this happens with the media, getting good footage to go out then and feed the world of the story, build the case for the story. Well, again, we don't know all of these kinds of details. We know that there are some things, finally from this policeman, that there is obviously some kind of a negotiation going on. And likely, we're learning the system now. Really, they're waiting for money to be promised and to be exchanged. Well, bless the Lord, we decided to leave all of our money in the Dominican Republic. We couldn't even be tempted to pay them anything by the grace of God. Well, eventually the children are removed from us, from our care, and we learn later that they're taken to a United Nations, a UNICEF tent home, a temporary home run by some Australians who are there giving humanitarian care. And they walk us down a long hallway and around a couple of dogleg turns down the way, and it's clear that we're moving out of a public office area into more of a jail type of a scenario. Still, no one's communicating to us what's the next step. Eventually, we turn a corner and it's clear we're about to walk through a door that moves into this particular holding cell area. We're then being told to take off our shoes, or our shoelaces and our belts, leave our luggage, what little luggage we had, our backpacks in this room. And so we do, and I want to stop for just a second. And while this is going on, some things rolling through my head in this process, I'm thinking, oh dear God, what have I done to these men who I've brought with me? What's happened? And so there's some selfishness in my mind. There's some wrestling internally. There's shock on me. There's dismay. What has gone wrong? How is this happening? Do they not really understand the whole scenario of what we are here doing? This is internally inside of me. I turn around, and by the grace of God, this particular brother has his Gideon New Testament with him. And so I want to start counting heads. Where are we? Are we all here? Where are the women? Or these kinds of things rolling through my head. And I have at least this responsibility for the men that I asked to come and go with me. And then this adopted responsibility for these women that Pastor Clint Henry personally called me and asked to make sure that we don't let them out of our sight. I look back, and Brother Steve has his Gideon New Testament open, and he's already made his way to the barred door. And while he's there with his Gideon New Testament open, he's obviously reading his English Gideon Bible. And out of the dark side of the cell are these arms of Haitian men holding a Gideon Bible in Creole. And it's open to the same book. And Steve's pointing here, and he's reading it, and then they read it in their language. And I think, okay, God, you need to really get my attitude in order. Within a couple of hours, we're talking, discussing, considering, and Steve says, obviously what God has done is he's changed our ministry from a children's ministry to a jail ministry. So, okay, Paul. So the preacher has to go to the bathroom to preach to himself, because he can't let anyone see how shamed he is that he's thinking so temporal. I have to walk through this most disgusting bathroom where the sewer system was plugged up. The septic system was not receiving any new waste, probably since the earthquake. And it takes a few moments for me for the Holy Spirit to really capture me and say, trust me, Paul. I am not surprised where you are. I'm not surprised. He's not speaking to me in audible words. These are things that I'm recalling from personal times with the Lord in reading His Word. The power of that Word begins to preach to my soul. I trust it's doing the same to all of the men. Every night we have conversations, deep conversations like this, encouraging one another, blessing one another. So this is a Saturday. The court system is closed. We're not going to be in court until Monday. So that means at least 2 nights in jail. I think, well, okay, Paul, you can do this. 2 nights here, you'll be okay. Well, anyway, I'm way down in the weeds here. I need to get the plane back up here. I don't know. It's probably going to skip back down. Monday comes, we go to court. We're squeezed into a couple of police cars. Keep in mind, we're 10 Americans. We're not little Americans. And we're in the back of little trooper type of vehicles. And sirens going, blaring, horns honking everywhere the police drive us. And they're driving reckless speeds through streets that are crowded with people, debris, cars. It's a miracle alone in that respect that we stand here today alive. from that first trip to the jail. Well, we arrive there. A man he comes to us and represents to us. He's our lawyer. Isn't that sweet? How did that happen? We had a man arrive there. Come to find out, he had made some communication over the weekend with our families back at home, and they had begun some discussions and dialogue. And so they're mentioning our families' names, so we know that apparently he really has made contact with them. They're discussing these things, and so he represents us to the court, to the judge. I don't know how long. We're not there very long at all. We do all come in. We're asked a couple of simple questions, and that's about all of the interrogation there in the court scenario is. We learn later that he told us he was working for us pro bono. That every lawyer that works for us tells us the same story. We're here working pro bono for you. We're here because we know your intentions were right. We know that you were doing everything you were asked to do. We know you're here, and this level of attention, we are going to use this to stop this nasty corruption in our country. Only to find out we were a part of the corruption. We were being used as pawns in the corruption. Telling us there's no charges, because we're sitting there, how much are we going to have to pay you? We're responsible for everything we do, and so someday we're going to have to pay you. How much is this going to cost? Don't worry about it. Not a problem. Not a problem. You'll hear that a lot. Anywhere you go outside of the United States. That's one of the first phrases I think they learn. Not a problem. Not a problem. We go back to, as we leave there, we understand there's some more dialogue and discussion going on without us in the room. Come to find out, negotiations of prices have been being made with our families. This particular scenario, Renee will know this side of things much clearer and much more succinct than I do. But it's around $5,000, just to use a ballpark figure. I don't know. Double that?
It became $10,000 per person.
Began out for one lump sum for all of us, and then it became amounts over $10,000 per person before the day was over. And so we were pleased to fire him on the spot. And go back to jail with our first formal charge of kidnapping, because we did not agree to pay the fees, the lawyer fees that he was going to request. So apparently from that discussion, he went back into a closed door meeting with the judge, and he came out they escorted us out, then back to the jail, and we learned later that night that we had a charge of kidnapping. So now we would need to prove this first official charge of kidnapping to prove our innocence, that we did not kidnap these children. In other words, we didn't drive the bus around town snatching up children and making unsubstantiated promises of homes of paradise outside of here. So we feel like we're in good shape here, because we've documented everything we've done. We have phone numbers, we have names, we have all these things. We feel confident. This is clearly at this point some corruption inside of the system. The next day we go to court, which is the very next day. There's another man there, happy to represent us, whom we've never talked to, and our families at home had a little bit of dialogue. He was representing himself as a Jewish man from the Dominican Republic that knew Haitian law, and that no problem, this will be good, this will get worked out. He represents us. We're not there very long. We're escorted back to the jail, highly disappointed with our new second charge of trafficking children. So a lot of confusion over what happens when we're not in the room. Kidnapping, now trafficking. The next day we go to court. The second man who represented us is nowhere to be seen. And come to find out, the reason he's nowhere to be seen is because he's wanted by Interpol, international law, for trafficking children. I'm not making this stuff up. Again, this is the way it went. We went back to jail that day with a third charge of criminal association. So now we have to prove three cases, not just a misunderstanding of, oh, you wanted us to give you money whenever we we were crossing the border, to now you need to prove you are not kidnapping, you're not trafficking, and that you're not associated with this international known trafficker, who, by the way, we've been looking for years. And he showed up in court for us. He now sits in a prison in New York, by the way. Well, anyway, several days back and forth to court, promises. Every time we leave, the Haitian inmates give us a fanfare goodbye. We will never see you again. Goodbye. We thank you for coming. We loved the times with the Word. We loved to sing. All of these things, pressing on and moving along. Oh, Steve, there's a watch somewhere in Haiti. There's a razor somewhere in Haiti that belongs to Steve. When we went to jail, eventually we took all of our stuff with us initially, because we were always told, you will not come back. Take it all with you. Well, this third time, this is the routine. We decide to leave our stuff in the jail. And we come back and we see the other men wearing Steve's watch. He'd been using his razor, using a few other things. But I thought you were pointing at your watch like, okay, Paul. Now everybody's looked at their watch. So here we are. Dependent to wait upon. How did this thing just become what it is? We have no idea really what you're being told. We learn later the nasty, the disgusting things that were spoken about us. God saved us, I think, largely from much of that. We knew some things, but we did not know the extent of it. We did not know the scope of it. We don't know that this was an international news. So we wait, we wait, we wait. We hear good news, we hear bad news. We hear good news, we hear bad news. By the grace of God, we did have some communication with home. The ladies are in a smaller room, separated from us, because we're in male population of the jail, and they put them in a secure place away from us. They had access to all of their luggage and their cell phones. So we began to eventually be able to send messages, text messages, to our homes. So we'd write a note on a note, slip it under the iron door that separated the male population from the room where they were in. They'd send a message. They'd come back and knock on the door because they had a message returned back to us. I won't go through them all, but I have every one of those glorious messages that I received from Renee. So what's happening here is in my life. And in a moment, Steve doesn't know this, and Silas barely knows this. I'm going to ask them to come stand in front of you. And I'm going to ask them some questions. And I want them to speak extemporaneously to you. I want them to just speak observingly from their heart. A lot of soul searching. The realities at this point are serious. If we cannot prove our innocence, I will most likely never see my wife again. The 38 charges of kidnapping, trafficking, and criminal association. I will not ever go home if we cannot prove our innocence. The weight of this, that Renee's brother is in the cell with me, and he has 4 children at home. His children will grow up without a father. The reality of Steve, if he goes home, if he even goes home at all, what will become of his job? Think of Jim, my cousin, and I think, what has become of his reputation in a city where he's known as an honest businessman? Wrestling internally in my mind, God, what have I done? Making it too personal and not being satisfied to wait upon the glory of God. What have I done to these men's lives? And then the weight of all weights is, if my son ever goes home, he will go home an old man. What have I done? And the weight of what about my church? What will become of them? Proved to be an unnecessary weight to put upon my own soul, to put upon my old mind. But the promise that you'll go home tomorrow was no longer good news. At day 15 and 16, it's like, don't tell me we're going home tomorrow. I'm convinced I'm never going home. To tell me I'm going home tomorrow only sets my hopes high, only to be crushed tomorrow. How pathetic is this? It's just been a few weeks. So, transportation back to court picks up. We're escorted again and again. I haven't even told you this sweet thing. Remember I told you that we met Alex outside of that orphanage. This was about 2 days before we were arrested. The very next morning after the first day we were in jail, God sent this brother to our jail cell with a small grocery bag with bananas and crackers. He called them cookies. I was excited. Cookies. I was still excited that they were crackers. But again, in this Napoleonic judicial system, you don't eat unless your family brings you food. And we have no family. God had, long before we even met this brother, had raised up a family for us, raised up a church for us. Every single day, Alex showed up with a little bit of food. It became the highlight of the day. If it was late in the afternoon, we're thinking, well, Alex hasn't been here today. When will Alex come? And sure enough, he would arrive. Come to find out, he would have been there sooner, but he was delayed. This reason or that reason. We find out later there are people threatening him for his kindness toward us. It became harder and harder for him to get in. So through that kindness, began to build what it is today in this friendship and this relationship that we have with Alex. That led up to that eventual last day. As I'm certain everyone's telling us, we hear news that you're going home tomorrow. No, we're not. We're really not. And then to see that bright smile of this dear brother, today, your freedom has come. Little did I know that those last 19 days would be easy days compared to the nightmarish days I would live when I return home. I'll tell that another day. I'll remind you of those days another time. Today, by the grace of God, what the world might look at and say, this insignificant, small church in out-of-the-way Idaho now provides full nourishment, complete education, wide spectrum of medical care, access to the greatest hospital in the city. You have 68 children that you care for through this brother and his wife. You employ 20 Haitians. I cannot explain that. What man intended for harm, I'll pick up the words of Joseph, not to make them my words, but I take them as encouragement from Scripture. What man intended to cause harm, God intended for His glory, for our good, but for His glory. Silas and Steve, come here. They may not have come tonight if they knew I was going to do this. And listen, I understand that the night has moved along and you may need to go. And no one ever around here holds that as a bad thing. We get that and understand that. You can sit or stand. I don't know. It's up to you. Maybe, and it may cause them some moments to just think out loud with you, because I haven't given them these questions. I haven't asked them to come prepared to share anything. But I wonder, Steve or Silas, if you guys, is there anything that stands out in your mind as a significant moment where you experienced the kindness of God in those 19 days? There were hard days. Is there anything about it that stands out as a kindness from God? Yeah. Get really close to that microphone.
Sitting there, hot, sweaty, waiting for Alex to come in, and we're out of water. That's one thing I remember, is being out of water. And the water that was there was yucky water. It was filthy, white-looking stuff. And they told us, don't drink this water because you will get sick. And so we were sitting there going, okay, well, we're sharing with all these inmates, and they're drinking all of our water, and we're running out of water. And then people would bring us water. I don't know if you brought us, I remember you bringing in tangerines. You'd bring in like 3 or 4 tangerines, and you'd get just a little slice of tangerine. You didn't get enough to actually be full with, but it was these, Alex and Junior and Florence came in every day, and they brought us something, crackers, cookies. And that was just like, okay, the Lord's going to take care of us. When you find that God says, trust me. And you can actually see it happen. Very powerful.
Real specific to that, one of those times where we were not about to run out of water, we were out of water. We couldn't go down to the store and buy water. We couldn't call someone and say, can you bring us water? The only thing we could do was pray. We would circle up and ask God to provide water. And not just once, but on a couple of occasions of doing that, while we're praying, a complete stranger would come through the doors in the outer part of the jail with cases of water. While we were realizing our desperate need, God already had it covered. He was pleased we were asking Him for it. It's not that I ever felt like, well, that was a waste of time. We immediately rejoiced in the Lord for answering our prayer while it was happening. Amen. Silas?
There is a lot of times when, as I consider those days, now almost 9 years ago, as a 19-year-old, and I don't even know during those moments in the prison that the fullness of the reality of what was taking place ever hit so fully until we returned home. But those days in the prison were days filled with ranging emotions, but moments of some of the sweetest peace that I think I've ever felt. As the day would have come and gone, the promise of going home is turned out to be another false peak, and the strange knuckle of meat that came in had very little meat. But the gentle breeze would blow through the window that was up near the top of the cell, and the man that was from the Dominican Republic, he was kind of a strange guy. Was always maybe a little bit worried about him at the same time, but he would be singing some song, and we would have our Bibles. I think our Bibles were the only thing. I don't even know how we ended up getting them, but we did have them. There was a sweetness that I don't know how to explain in any other way, of just the peace of God. We'd have that Bible in our shoes, and we'd lay our heads down, laying on concrete, because concrete was better than the fear of whatever was in those mats that were in the room. And the nights weren't filled with sleep, but there was a rest. The reading of whatever psalm we would finish as a full group, and the singing of some song that was echoed along with in different languages from the other men. In a dangerous way, have looked back at those days longing for that peace, but at the same time, being able to have that and to move forward and to see how God uses those times as reminders, even though the days that would follow were difficult and unknown, that there was and still is this peace that God can give us just from His Word. I really don't know how we got that, because there was other things that I had medicines in my bag that I think I would have grabbed before at that time, but I'm forever grateful that it was our Bibles that somehow we had.
Yeah. One of the things that I'll never forget of the kindness of what God had done through a public educated son of mine who took 2 years of Spanish. Well, you took 4? Oh, he's smarter than I thought. 4 years of high school public education Spanish. Of course, we live in a community that has Spanish speakers, so it's better than just that. The necessity of that was even of such a detail that when we're ushered into this Haitian jail, none of us speak any Haitian. We have paper that has a few words on it, but that's only to find out where the bathrooms are and what's the fastest way out of here. For God to have in that jail cell a man from the Dominican Republic. And if you know anything about Espanol, the island itself, it's divided as Haiti and Dominican Republic. The Haitian side of the island speaks Creole. The Dominican Republic side of the island speaks Spanish. So our first initial connection with the men is through Silas speaking his Spanish to this Dominican Republican who speaks Spanish and Creole. So we're able to communicate and dialogue, and if there's any great confusions, we're able to get that settled through that provision of language. Provision that God gave us. No small thing. There was no part of it that can ever be weighed as an unnecessary part of those days. I guess we did learn later that most of the Haitians spoke a little bit of English. More than they let on. But that still by itself gave a lot of clarity to some of the communication as it was. Silas and Steve, just a couple of other questions I wanted to press in on you is, if there's anything you could say to your church from the vantage point of those days, it's hard to think from vantage points because we have 9 years now past us. And probably these last 9 years will weigh a lot in how you'll answer this. And I think that that's part of the necessity of this. What would you say to your church? What would you want your church to know while you were sitting in jail and could not communicate back home to them? What would you want them to know? What would you want them to be doing?
think and it is largely the 9 years since that may have shaped this in my mind, but I would long for or to have the understanding that this is not out of the normal for the majority of time, for Christians to be facing these types of situations. We live in a time and a place that is a lot of ease and comfort. We might prepare our hearts to be ready to be able to take comfort and joy and peace in God in those situations, even though we live most of our day-to-day lives in a country where it's relatively easy and no one would have any desire to use your country or your Christian title as a reason to get money or as a reason to put you in prison out of hate or dislike for your beliefs, but that we would prepare our hearts even now to let God be sufficient in any circumstance.
Yes, good. Good. Steve?
Well, there was that point in time where you got to kind of like what you looked at was, if we are convicted of this, we're going to spend the next 30 years to 50 years in prison. And you sit there and you go, well, is that what the Lord wants for me? And am I willing to say, yes, Lord, if that's what you want, I will be happy here. Not maybe happy. I don't know that that's a happy place. But being satisfied where God wants us to be. And I think most everybody in our group had to come to that realization of, if this is what God wants me to do for the next 30 to 50 years, okay, Lord, thank you. And coming to that place was hard. But it was probably one of the most beneficial things there. Say, if you want me to be here, I will be.
I have one more question at least to ask these guys, but I want to stop the stream and I want to speak to you, the church, for a minute. Not all of you were here during those days. Some of you were hearing about us from the nightly news, and you knew nothing about us. But some of you were here during those days. And I got to tell you, when I would hear news from Renee, one of the things that was really most encouraging to me was I would hear that you were gathering in your homes to pray. You were not standing outside of the State House demanding our governor release us. You were gathering in your small homes and you were praying. I would say, do that. Do that every day. Do that all the time when you're facing turmoil. Do that all the time. Pray in your homes. One of the most tender messages I received from Renee was that she had moved in with the Steinekes. Now, I'm thinking, I'd love to live with the Steinekes. Dan's a great cook. Dan, bless the Lord for your household. Bless the Lord. I hear word that Pastor John was gathering you to pray, instructing you to pray. He was the right man for the right hour for this good church. Well, on and on. This really is a 30,000-foot view of this thing, now that I think about it. There's too much more to tell you tonight. Steve, Silas, what do you remember the most about those God-ordained days?
The singing.
Yeah, explain the singing, Steve, with that microphone.
The singing. We spent hours singing. Songs that we didn't know the words of, but we knew the tunes. And songs that we had to write down, but we sang them a lot. And it was, the Haitians had their songs too. And they had their words for the same songs that we would sing. But there was just some very wonderful times when we would sing and we would read the scriptures. And one of the, do this without crying. One time I was sitting there sleeping on the cement, and there was a little tiny spot that was right next to my head, because I was up on this, I wasn't on the floor, I was on this bench. And Paul is like 2 or 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the morning. And
You don't have to tell everything.
Paul wakes up, and I wake up, and he's sitting there reading his Bible, because that's the only light that's there. It's 4 o'clock in the morning, and he's sitting there reading his Bible. And I just sitting there going, my goodness, this is a wonderful picture of this man sitting there. I mean, it was like a week into it. And you had been just sitting there reading your Bible. And I caught you doing that at least 3 or 4 times in the middle of the night, and he would read for hours, just reading his Bible. And I was going, my goodness, that is a wonderful thing that this man was doing. He was, I also remember the first night we were there, and you said, well, let's get to sleep. And you took your boots and you set them down on the ground, and you made them a pillow. Just something I remember. And it was special because you were strong. And I want to say thank you.
Oh, bless the Lord, that kindness. I thought you were going to talk about the time the spider showed up.
Oh.
And you heard me scream like a girl.
I think that was
You
Silas.
didn't? Oh, it was Silas. Yeah, that's right. It may have been all 10 of us. Oh, yeah. I want to scream right now just thinking about it.
I think I would have to agree with Steve that there was a certain sweetness both to the singing and the reading. I remember these moments. I can't even remember the inmates' names. It was a shorter man, and he would come in almost, in my memory at least, I remember him being almost this frantic, and he would come in with his little Gideon Bible and just want to read the Psalms with us, and he would have us get out our Bibles, and he would read it in Creole, and then we would read it in English. And there was I regret that was unable to consistently hold the thought in my mind as I returned home, but there was moments where there was a certain understanding that there is no better place to be right now. This is the place I wouldn't long for anywhere else. This is where God has us, and there is a sweetness and a rightness to it. Struggled and stumbled as we came home. It was hard days. You were kind and sweet family to me. And there were days when I would spend 3 or 4 days in the South Hills, and come home on Sunday morning smelling very much like campfire. And I would come to the church, and I think you would all still hug me, even though I stunk very bad. But I would never take back those days. And the sweetness of the hardship. And so grateful for the lesson of being able to see countless of the accounts in the Bible, pieces of them lived out, and how God would take these moments and then now to see his plan, and how there are so many young girls off of the streets, and not only off of the streets, but gathering together. And as I can remember, just so excited to open the Psalms, to read and to pray, to have those same moments.
Amen.
Hard to pick one moment that I remember so well.
It is. It really is. Probably an unfair question. So fast forward 3 years, fast forward 2 years, Alex asked me to come be in his wedding because he found the love of his life, Joanne. And so Renee made flight arrangements, and we were so strategic that here's what we'll do. She'll fly in first, and then I'll fly in, because I don't know what they're going to do to me, because I hadn't been back. Renee flies. Well, I don't need to tell all these stories. She spends a couple of hours, not in detainment, but in a airport office watching Haitian soap operas. I'm sure she was not engrossed in the drama, but everyone else was in that Haitian jail, or that office. I flew in a couple of hours later, greeted her, and the overwhelming joy was immediately upon me to see that smiling face of Alex there just outside the airport doors, that we were reunited for a moment. Then the days of a wedding, which is a whole, I could spend hours talking to you about that experience. Come home from that with some beginning dialogues. Are there possibilities of us being partnered together in an ongoing work in Haiti? And know this, that in every conversation that we have with Alex, I don't have to convince Alex that we only do gospel advancing work. And this is his desire as well. Another trip in with Steve now, his first time to go back since those days, and my second time back, we go to sit because there is the likelihood that we are now in an official children's home ministry. And so Steve's with me. We have 20 children. That's how the home started, and how they all came to Alex is his story to tell, and their story to tell. Steve and I spend days in the city hunting down beds and finding equipment, tables and chairs, things for these children who are now going to be in our home, in a home that we were renting. I came back to you and said, what do you think? You want to do it? So let me speak to you again, church. You have to be the most faith-driven people I know. Leading up to those days of our time in Haiti, I hadn't been paid a paycheck in months. We were struggling as a church financially. And we're being asked, hey, there's children that need this kind of help from us. And I ask you, what do you think? Steve gives a report and speaks about the situation and about the gospel paramount to this work. And without hesitation, your answer is yes. Yeah. Nobody asked, how are we going to pay for it? But we instruct one another, we will not ask man for this. We will ask God for this. So we determined at that point that everything we would do in this particular ministry. It's not to say what other people do is wrong, but what we would do, we would not ask men to financially support our work. We would put the needs before God and ask God to provide. Started out with, Jen, was it $1,200 a month? $1,250 a month. We didn't have $1,250 a month. I can't tell you how often I would long to hear the Wednesday night prayer meeting and you pleading with God to provide. Well, we clearly didn't have. And how often could I tell you that first year I'd walk out to that mailbox and open that mailbox and I'd come back rejoicing. So I got an envelope from a guy from this place and a letter from this place and a check from this place, and I'm opening them up as I'm walking back to my office, and I'm opening it up, it's $25. Open up another one, $50. I open up another one, $100. Open up another one, $1,000. Open up another one, it's $10. Open up another one, it's $5,000. I open up another one, $10,000. I think, oh dear God, what are you doing? What have we said yes to? Years go by. Every time someone knocks on the door with a child, even though I've told Alex many times we cannot take any more children, he somehow finds another bed somewhere to bring into the home. Now we're looking at a couple of $1,000s. Now it's $3,000 a month. Now it's $4,000 a month. Can I tell you, I still walk back from that mailbox sometimes. How did this person know about what we do? How does someone have $5,000 to just sit down and write a check to a nobody church in a nobody city, in a nobody state? I can't explain these things. The only thing I can do is what God taught us that night the first time we knew we didn't have water.
Oh, yeah. Sit down.
We'd have to ask God for water, and He would provide. And so, church, now, by the grace of God, we've had slim months. We've had times where it was time to wire the money, and we didn't have the money. I'd go back to my office and weep before the Father and ask Him to provide again. I can't tell you how many times while I'm praying, the phone rings. Paul, I have some money I want to send. Where do I send it? Again, time after time, walking to the mailbox. But sometimes I want to go out and hug the mailman who has nothing to do with this. He's simply the agent of good news. Now, by the grace of God, consistently, more than enough money comes for the home every month. Money enough to travel now without robbing the savings account of my home or pleading with God to provide for this or for that. And now, by the grace of God, for the first time, for me to introduce this man, this woman, to a faithful people. Alex, these people believe. They believe this God. And they trust this God. And they wait upon this God. He has never disappointed us. And we are so glad you're here. So church, rejoice together. Pastor John's going to lead us in a song that I rarely can get through. I didn't ask him for us to sing the song. So you are a patient people. You will endure my weeping over here in a moment. They're weeping of joy, though. They are not sorrowful tears when I weep of this news of God's kindness. I want to invite you to stand together. I don't think it's possible for us to recreate what it sounds like when there's 20 men, 10 of them singing, 15 of them singing in Creole, and 5 of them singing in English, in cinder block walls that echo and vibrate while they sing. I've never been able to duplicate or replicate that sound, Steve. I agree, Silas. The singing was extraordinary. But when we sing, not because we're singing notes or words, but we sing because of our God. Oh, may it be a sweet balm upon our soul as we bless the Lord. Turn back to praise when the darkness closes in, Lord. Still I will say, blessed be the name of the Lord. Blessed be your name. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Blessed be your glorious name. Be your name when the sun is shining down on